I felt my final heartbeat stutter in that freezing hospital room listening to my biological parents laugh in the hallway. They had just drained my bank accounts after coercing me into giving my liver to their golden child, my brother. Left to die of sepsis, I closed my eyes as a hollow broken shell. Then, I gasped. The sterile stench of the ICU vanished, replaced by the suffocating clouds of expensive cedarwood cologne and sharp artificial fresh linen. I was 9 years old again, sitting in the back of our rusted Honda Accord. It was May 8th, the exact day my parents planned to abandon me at the boardwalk pier. In my past life, I begged them to stay. This time, I was going to pack my own bags. The beeping of the heart monitor was the last sound I remembered. A slow, agonizing rhythm that mirrored the pathetic crawl of my 31-year-old life slipping away. Dr. Harris had looked at me with profound pity just hours before. His clipboard resting against his chest as he delivered the news. The anti-rejection medications were gone. The infection had spread to my bloodstream. I had given my liver to Julian, my younger brother. I did it because Gideon and Victoria Vance, my parents, had begged on their hands and knees. They promised me love. They promised me a place in the family I'd spent my entire life trying to earn. But the moment the surgery was deemed a success, they vanished from my recovery room. They didn't just leave. They took the debit card from my wallet, draining the meager life savings I had built as a freelance graphic designer, claiming they needed it to cover Julian's post-op luxury retreat. I was left alone in County General, unable to afford the critical antibiotics. I died listening to Victoria's voice on a voicemail, casually telling me to stop being so dramatic about a little fever. And then, I woke up. I didn't open my eyes to the white acoustic ceiling tiles of the hospital. I opened them to the peeling gray fabric of a car roof. The rumble of tires on a poorly paved highway vibrated through my small, fragile bones. The air was suffocatingly hot, smelling intensely of Gideon's heavy cologne and a sharp, artificial fresh linen air freshener swinging violently from the rearview mirror. "Stop fidgeting, Caleb. You're giving me a migraine." A sharp, irritated voice snapped from the front passenger seat. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the back of that perfectly coiffed head. Victoria. She looked so young. The silver streaks I remembered from the hospital were gone, replaced by a deep, midnight black hair dye. Beside her, gripping the steering wheel of our 2002 Honda Accord, was Gideon, his jaw clenched in permanent dissatisfaction, his stark white hair catching the glare of the sun. I looked down at my hands. They weren't the calloused, forebruised hands of a 31-year-old dying man. They were tiny, smudged with dirt, clad in a faded, oversized orange band t-shirt that used to belong to Julian. Panic, sharp and cold, pierced my chest, but it was quickly swallowed by a wave of pure, absolute clarity. I knew exactly where we were. I knew exactly what day it was. May 8th, the Mercer County Boardwalk Pier. I was 9 years old. In my previous life, this was the day the trauma truly began. Gideon had recently been laid off from his high-end job as a corporate mergers attorney at the firm downtown, and Victoria's credit card debt from her failed luxury interior decorating business had caught up with them. They were drowning in bills. Their solution wasn't to cut back on Julian's elite tennis academy fees or Gideon's private yacht club dues. Their solution was to shed the dead weight. The child they never wanted. Me. They had driven me 2 towns over to the sprawling chaotic boardwalk. Victoria had bought me a single cotton candy, smiled a tight, entirely fake smile, and told me to wait by the entrance of the giant wooden roller coaster while she and Gideon went to the bathroom. I waited. I waited as the sun beat down, burning my shoulders. I waited as the sky turned purple, then black. I waited until the pier lights shut off, and a security guard found me shivering under a bench. When the police finally tracked them down 3 days later, Victoria had put on an Oscar-worthy performance, sobbing that I had run away into the crowd, and they had been searching tirelessly. But I had seen the packed suitcases in the trunk that day. I knew the truth. Still, I spent the next 10 years in and out of the foster system, desperately trying to win back their affection, culminating in the ultimate sacrifice of my own body. Never again, I thought, a freezing calm settling over my 9-year-old mind. I looked over at the car seat next to me. 6-year-old Julian was fast asleep, clutching an imported, top-tier virtual reality gaming headset. He was dressed in rare, royal purple. I was wearing his literal garbage. "Are we almost there?" I asked. My voice was high-pitched, a child's voice, but the tone was entirely devoid of emotion. Gideon glanced in the rearview mirror, his pale icy blue eyes shifting away guiltily the moment they met mine. "Yeah, Caleb, almost there. You want to ride the roller coaster today, right?" "Yes," I replied smoothly, staring out the window at the passing marshlands. "I want to ride the coaster, and you and Mom can go get some quiet time." Victoria whipped her head around, her matching piercing blue eyes freezing me under her perfectly plucked eyebrows, knitting together in suspicion. She expected me to whine, to cling, to be the needy burden she despised. "Don't get smart with us. Just do what you're told when we get there." "I will," I said softly, resting my head against the hot glass. "I promise, Mom. I'll do exactly what you want." I closed my eyes, letting the vibration of the road soothe me. My parents wanted to throw me away like trash because they thought I was worthless. They thought abandoning me would magically fix their miserable, shallow lives. This time, I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't chase the car. I would let them cut the cord. And then, I would make sure they lived long enough to watch me soar while they sank into the very dirt they tried to bury me in. The Mercer County boardwalk was exactly as I remembered it. A sensory overload of screaming children, blaring arcade music, and the heavy scent of salty sea air, burnt sugar, and diesel exhaust radiating off the planks in shimmering waves. Gideon parked the Accord near the back of the dirt lot. He didn't even turn off the engine right away. He sat there, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Victoria unbuckled her seatbelt and reached into her designer purse. A purse that cost more than a month's worth of groceries. "All right, Caleb. Get out," Victoria ordered, not looking at me. I unbuckled my seatbelt and pushed the heavy car door open, stepping out into the suffocating humidity. Julian stirred in the back seat, but didn't wake up. Victoria didn't bother getting out of the car. She simply rolled down her window and handed me a crumpled $5 bill. "Go get yourself some cotton candy. Wait right by the entrance of the roller coaster," she instructed, her voice tight, vibrating with a nervous energy. "Your father and I are going to take Julian to the arcade on the other side. Don't move from that spot. Do you understand?" In my past life, my lower lip had trembled. I had asked if I could come to the arcade too. I had grabbed the tailored linen blazer Victoria was wearing, begging her not to leave me alone in the crowd. She had slapped my hand away, calling me a clingy brat. This time, I didn't reach for her. I took the crumpled $5 bill and smoothed it out with deliberate, agonizing slowness. I looked Victoria dead in the eyes. Her gaze flickered, a momentary flash of unease crossing her features when she met the cold, ancient stare radiating from my 9-year-old face. "Okay," I said plainly. "Goodbye, Victoria. Goodbye, Gideon." I didn't call them Mom and Dad. The words slipped out effortlessly, severing the emotional chains that had dragged me to an early grave in my first life. Gideon flinched as if struck. "Caleb, what did you?" But Victoria quickly rolled up the window, her jaw set. "He's just throwing a tantrum. Let's go, Gideon. Now." I turned my back on the rusted Honda Accord and began walking toward the flashing lights of the Midway. I didn't look back. Even over the roar of the crowd and the mechanical whir of the rides, I heard the crunch of gravel as Gideon threw the car into drive and sped away. The physical distance between us grew with every second, but the psychological distance was already light years wide. I was free. I didn't go to the roller coaster. I didn't buy cotton candy. Instead, I navigated the sea of sweaty tourists and screaming teenagers with the precision of a man on a mission. I walked straight past the rigged ring toss games and the funnel cake stands, heading directly toward the front gates where I knew the security substation was located. It was a small air-conditioned trailer near the main ticket booths. I pushed the heavy aluminum door open. The blast of cold air was a shock to the system. Inside, a heavy-set police officer was sitting at a metal desk eating a slightly squashed turkey club sandwich while filling out paperwork. His name tag read Brennan. He looked up, surprised to see a small dirt-smudged boy standing alone in the doorway. "Hey there, little buddy. You lost?" I walked up to his desk, placed my hands flat on the cool metal surface, and looked at him. "I'm not lost, Officer Brennan. I was abandoned." He stopped mid-chew, carefully placing his sandwich down on its wrapper. "Abandoned? What do you mean, son? Did you lose your folks in the crowd?" "No," I replied, my voice remarkably steady. "My parents are Gideon and Victoria Vance. They drove me here from Pinehurst. They gave me $5, told me to stand by the coaster, and then they drove away in a 2002 Honda Accord. License plate JKL, 492. They packed my brother's clothes in the trunk, but none of mine. They don't have enough money to pay their credit cards, so they decided they didn't want to feed me anymore." Officer Brennan stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The sheer amount of detailed, articulate information coming from a tiny, malnourished 9-year-old clearly short-circuited his brain for a moment. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath, quickly grabbing his radio. "Dispatch, this is Brennan at the Pier substation. I need a child services unit down here." "Yeah, right now." Within an hour, the substation was buzzing. A social worker named Valerie Monroe arrived. She was a stern-looking woman with kind eyes, carrying a clipboard. Valerie crouched down to my eye level, offering me a juice box. "Caleb, are you sure they drove away?" Valerie asked gently. "Sometimes parents just get turned around." "They drove away, Miss Valerie," I said, sipping the apple juice. "They don't want me. Please don't make me go back to them." I knew exactly how to play this. I knew that if I detailed the emotional neglect, the times Victoria locked me in the basement so Julian could have played dates without my embarrassing presence, the time Gideon forgot to buy me winter shoes, they would build a case. I spent 2 hours calmly, methodically detailing the reality of the Vance household to Valerie Monroe. I gave them dates, specific arguments I had overheard about bankruptcy, and the location of Victoria's hidden cache of unpaid bills. By the time the sun set, I was sitting in the back of Valerie's sedan, driving away from the boardwalk. I was officially a ward of the state. I looked out the window at the passing streetlights. "Enjoy your money, Victoria. Spoil your golden child, Gideon. Let's see how long it takes before the rot inside you destroys your perfect little lives without me there to be your punching bag." The Maplewood Children's Home was a brick monolith that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and industrial floor wax. For an actual 9-year-old, it would have been a house of horrors. The older kids were ruthless. The staff was overworked and underpaid. And the beds felt like slabs of concrete. But for a 31-year-old man trapped in a child's body, it was merely a waiting room. I kept my head down. I didn't fight over the TV remote. I didn't cry when the lights went out. I made my bed with military precision, did my schoolwork flawlessly, and helped the kitchen staff peel potatoes. I became invisible to the bullies and invaluable to the matrons. Within 3 weeks, Valerie Monroe was calling me the miracle child of her caseload. "You're adapting remarkably well, Caleb," Valerie said one Tuesday afternoon. "Most children in your position struggle. I'm just grateful to have 3 meals a day, Ms. Valerie." I replied, offering a polite practiced smile. Well, your excellent behavior has bumped you up the placement list. Valerie smiled. I have someone coming to meet you today. She's a single woman, never fostered before, but her background checks are spotless. She specifically asked for an older child who needed a quiet environment. 10 minutes later, the door to the visiting room opened. She walked in looking like a gust of warm wind. She was in her early 50s with a slightly plump figure, warm brown eyes, and curly deep umber hair that refused to be tamed by a silver minimalist pendant around her neck. She was wearing high-waisted canvas trousers and a crisp white button-down with the sleeves rolled up, and I could faintly smell the bright, grounding scent of fresh ginger, mint, and pressed citrus clinging to her clothes. Caleb, this is Elena Vega, Valerie introduced. Elena stopped a few feet away from me, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. She didn't look at me with pity, nor did she look at me like an equation to be solved. She looked at me with genuine raw apprehension, the kind that comes from wanting something to go perfectly. Hi, Caleb, Elena said, her voice surprisingly soft, carrying a warm, gentle tone with a subtle Latin American influence. It's real nice to meet you. I brought you something. I wasn't sure what you liked, but I manage Verde organic juices over on 8th Street, and our kitchen team made a fresh batch of lemon blueberry scones this morning. She held out a small white paper bag. I stood up and took the bag. It was still warm. I looked at Elena. Her fingernails were short and unpainted, bearing the tiny marks of a woman who spent her life working around commercial prep gear and heavy blending equipment. She was a working-class woman scraping by, just like I had been in my past life. Thank you, Miss Elena. I said softly. I took a bite of the pastry. It was incredible. It's delicious. Elena beamed, the nervous tension instantly melting from her shoulders. Oh, goodness. I can blend a perfect wellness shot, but high-quality pastry dough has always been my nemesis. That afternoon, Valerie finalized the weekend visitation paperwork. By Friday, I was packing my meager belongings into a plastic trash bag and getting into Elena's battered 2001 Honda Civic. Elena's apartment was located above a busy laundromat. It was tiny, just 2 bedrooms and a combined kitchen and living room, but it was spotless. The wooden floors gleamed. Hand-crocheted blankets were draped over the second-hand sofa, and sunlight streamed through the large front window, illuminating dozens of potted plants. It felt more like a home than the sprawling, sterile 4-bedroom house the Vances owned. It ain't much, mi cielo. Elena said apologetically, setting my plastic bag down in the smaller bedroom. The room had a twin bed with a classic gray waffle weave blanket. But the heater works great in the winter, and I painted the walls yellow because I read in a magazine that it's a happy color. It's perfect. I said. And for the first time since waking up in this timeline, I wasn't acting. My eyes actually stung with the threat of tears. Thank you, Elena. Over the next few months, life fell into a beautiful, quiet rhythm. Elena legally fostered me, and the transition was seamless. I helped her budget her wages from the juice bar using the financial skills I retained from adulthood. I showed her how to consolidate her small debts, restructure her supplier contracts, and cut unnecessary overhead. In return, she gave me something completely foreign. Unconditional warmth. She checked my homework, kissed my forehead before bed, and never once made me feel like a burden. Meanwhile, through the grapevine of the foster system and the county courts, I learned about the Vances. Valerie informed me that Gideon and Victoria had briefly attempted to claim they were looking for me when the police initially called them. But when confronted with my detailed testimony and the threat of severe child abandonment charges, they miraculously agreed to relinquish their parental rights entirely to avoid jail time. They signed the papers without a second thought. I heard they immediately used the money they saved on my expenses to buy Julian an ultra-exclusive, gold-plated handheld gaming console for his 7th birthday. Let them have their plastic toys. I was laying the groundwork for an empire. It was a chilly Tuesday evening in November when I initiated the next phase of my plan. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table counting out her paycheck logs. Next to her pile of paperwork was her weekly indulgence. A single neatly printed lottery ticket from the highway pit stop. Another donation to the state education fund, Elena chuckled, tapping the ticket. I know it's a waste of $2, but a girl can dream, right? Imagine if we won. I'd buy this whole building, fix that rattling dryer downstairs, and set up a college fund for you. I stared at the ticket. In my past life, I was obsessed with the news. I remembered the massive, record-breaking $380 million Mega Millions jackpot that had hit this exact county. I remembered reading the exhaustive articles about the anonymous winner. The winner had purchased the ticket at the highway pit stop. The winning numbers had been a distinct pattern that the news anchors joked about for weeks. 6, 14, 22, 31, 5, and the Mega Ball 18. And I knew the exact date of the draw. It was 3 weeks from today. Elena, I said, walking over to the table and looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes. I had a dream last night. She paused her tallying. A dream, mi cielo. Was it a nightmare? No. I shook my head, projecting an aura of mystical childhood wonder. It was a good dream. My grandfather came to me. He told me some numbers. He said they were magic numbers just for us. Elena smiled, entirely endeared by my childish imagination. Is that so? Well, magic numbers are hard to come by. What were they? I grabbed a pencil from the table and wrote them down on the back of an envelope. 6, 14, 22, 31, 5, 18. Can you play these numbers next time? I asked, looking at her pleadingly. Please. Just once. Elena looked at the envelope, then launched into a laugh, a rich, warm sound that filled the tiny apartment. Well, how can I say no to your guardian angel grandfather? All right, Caleb. Next week and the week after that, we play your magic numbers. But if we win, you have to promise me you won't spend it all on video games. I promise. I smiled, a sharp, calculating gleam hiding behind my 9-year-old eyes. I know exactly what we're going to spend it on. The weeks leading up to the Mega Millions draw were an agonizing exercise in patience. Every time Elena stopped by the highway pit stop, I made sure she played the numbers. 6, 14, 22, 31, 5, and the Mega Ball 18. I watched her hand over the crumpled dollar bills, her face displaying a mixture of mild amusement and indulgence. To her, it was a harmless game played to humor a traumatized child. To me, it was the key that would unlock our future and forge the ultimate weapon against the people who had thrown me away. Finally, the night arrived. December 3rd. The jackpot had swelled to an unprecedented $380 million, driven by a nationwide buying frenzy. The local news stations couldn't stop talking about it. The tiny apartment above the laundromat was filled with the smell of garlic herb roasted chicken. Elena was humming to herself, wiping down the cheap Formica countertops, while the small box television in the living room droned on with the 10 o'clock news. I sat cross-legged on the faded rug, my eyes glued to the screen, pretending to color in a workbook. All right, folks, it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for. The slick-haired news anchor announced. Let's see who is going home with nearly $400 million tonight. Elena, I called out, my voice laced with carefully manufactured innocent urgency. It's starting. The magic numbers. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and strolled into the living room, a fine smile on her face. She pulled the ticket from her apron pocket. All right, Caleb. Let's see if your grandfather's magic is working tonight. The first ball dropped. 6. Elena chuckled. Well, look at that. 1 for 1. The second ball dropped. 14. Elena's smile faltered slightly. She blinked, looking down at the ticket in her hand, then back up at the screen. Okay, that's a coincidence. 22, the announcer's voice boomed. The apartment went dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. 31, 5. Elena dropped the dish towel. It hit the hardwood floor with a soft pathetic slap. The color drained completely from her face. Her hands, calloused from years working raw machinery, began to shake so violently she nearly dropped the small slip of paper. And the mega ball is 18. The screen flashed with celebratory graphics, but Elena wasn't looking at the TV anymore. She was staring at me, her eyes wide with absolute unadulterated shock. She looked down at the ticket, then back at the TV, then back at the ticket. She read the numbers aloud, her voice nothing more than a hoarse breathless whisper. 6, 14. 22, 31. 5, 18. She sank onto the arm of the sofa, her knees giving out. I stood up, walked over and placed my small hand over hers, steadying the trembling paper. We won, Elena. I said softly, injecting just enough childlike wonder into my voice to mask the cold, hard reality of my adult mind. Grandpa was right. Caleb. Elena gasped, tears suddenly streaming down her face. She pulled me into a fierce, suffocating hug. Oh my God. Oh my God, mi cielo. It's real. It's nearly $400 million. She started to laugh, a slightly hysterical sound, and reached for the telephone. No. I said, my voice suddenly firm, cutting through her hysteria. I grabbed her wrist. Elena blinked down at me, surprised by the authority in my tone. What do you mean, no, Caleb? We can't tell anyone. I said, looking her dead in the eyes. I dropped the child act entirely for a moment, letting the weight of my 31 years show. If you tell people, bad men will come. They will try to take it. They might try to take me back. That was the magic phrase. The mere thought of losing me snapped Elena out of her lottery-induced delirium. The protective mother bear instinct kicked in instantly. She tightened her grip on my hand and nodded slowly. Okay. Okay, you're right. We stay quiet. What do we do, Caleb? We hide the ticket, I instructed calmly. And tomorrow, we find a lawyer. A very expensive one. The next morning, Elena called in sick to the juice bar. I guided her through the yellow pages, bypassing the flashy billboard lawyers and pointing her toward a high-end corporate firm in the city center. We secured a meeting with a senior partner named Nathaniel Cross. When Elena slid the winning ticket across his mahogany desk, the man nearly choked on his expensive coffee. I sat quietly in the oversized leather chair, swinging my legs as I listened to Cross explain the process. At my subtle leading questions disguised as childish curiosity, Cross recommended exactly what I wanted. The creation of a blind trust to claim the winnings anonymously. Within a month, the Amber Trust was established. The money, a staggering $171 million after lump sum taxes, hit the newly minted accounts. We moved out of the apartment above the laundromat under the cover of darkness, telling the landlord Elena had found a better job out of state. We were ghosts. Incredibly, unimaginably wealthy ghosts. And the timer on the Van Cess destruction had officially begun. 10 years is a long time to harbor a grudge, but revenge is a dish best served with compound interest. By my 19th birthday, the world had completely shifted on its axis. Elena and I did not squander the money. While Elena initially wanted to buy a modest house in the suburbs, I gently steered her toward a massive, secluded 50-acre estate in the neighboring county of Blackwood. It was protected by wrought iron gates, state-of-the-art security, and a dense forest that kept prying eyes away. Elena never lost her working-class roots. Instead of buying yachts, she bought businesses. With my strategic nudging, she purchased a chain of struggling local juice shops, completely revamped them, and turned them into a wildly profitable regional organic smoothie franchise. She invested in commercial real estate, buying up strip malls and apartment complexes. And I became the silent architect of our empire. Using my knowledge of the future, I convinced Nathaniel Cross to act as my proxy, investing heavily in the technology sector. I poured millions into early-stage cloud computing infrastructure and pioneering artificial intelligence startups right before they exploded. By the time I graduated high school, valedictorian, privately tutored, our net worth had eclipsed the $500 million mark. To the outside world, Elena Vega was a savvy, self-made real estate mogul who valued her privacy above all else. To me, she was still the woman who blended fresh mint wellness shots and loved me unconditionally. But while our star was rising, the Van Cess was violently burning out. I had kept tabs on them through a private investigator named Frank. Every quarter, a manila envelope would arrive on my mahogany desk detailing their pathetic descent. It started slowly. Gideon, arrogant and incompetent, had been fired from 3 successive firms. To avoid completely losing his lifestyle, he secretly drained his 401k. Victoria, completely oblivious to their financial peril, continued to live like the wife of a CEO. She bought designer clothes, threw lavish parties, and poured tens of thousands of dollars into Julian's competitive sports careers. Julian had grown into exactly the kind of monster you would expect. At 16, he was handsome, vain, and entirely ruthless. He demanded limited edition streetwear and rare designer tracksuits for his sweet 16, completely unaware that his parents were drowning in second mortgages to keep the lights on. The breaking point came when Gideon was caught embezzling funds from a high-end corporate litigation deal to cover Victoria's credit card debt. He avoided prison only by liquidating every single asset they had left. The final report from Frank arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Inside were foreclosure documents. The Van Cess had defaulted on their massive home in Pinehurst. The bank was seizing the property and it was going to public auction in exactly 2 weeks. I looked at the photographs Frank had included. A candid shot of Gideon looking aged and defeated, standing in his driveway next to a repossessed Lexus. A photo of Victoria, her roots showing and her black hair looking coarse and stringy, screaming at a process server on her front porch. A cold, satisfying smile spread across my face. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. "Nathaniel," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "There's a property going up for auction in Pinehurst. 442, Elm Street. I want you to buy it through our subsidiary holding company, Lex Properties. Pay whatever it takes to secure the deed." "Consider it done, Caleb," Nathaniel replied smoothly. "We're going to become landlords," I replied, staring at the photo of my biological mother's panicked face. "And I have some very specific tenants in mind." The auction was a bloodbath, but Nathaniel Cross secured the deed to 442, Elm Street with ease. When you have unlimited capital, outbidding local investors is practically a sport. Within 48 hours, Lex Properties was the official owner of the Vance family home. Serve them an immediate 30-day notice to vacate. According to Frank's surveillance, the arrival of the eviction notice sent the Van Cess into an absolute tailspin. They had nowhere to go. Their credit was destroyed. Their savings were gone. Gideon Vance did exactly what I predicted. He called the number listed on the Lex Properties eviction notice, begging for a meeting with the owner. Nathaniel forwarded the voicemail to me. Listening to Gideon's voice, once so arrogant and dismissive, now shaking with thinly veiled panic, felt like drinking fine wine. "Tell them the owner has agreed to a meeting at the property," I instructed Nathaniel. Friday at noon. Friday arrived, bringing with it a bitter, biting wind. I dressed carefully for the occasion. I wore a tailored charcoal gray wool suit from Milan, a silk shirt, and a pair of Oxford shoes that clicked sharply against the pavement. I looked like money. Cold, untouchable money. I drove myself to Pinehurst in a sleek, matte black Porsche Taycan, parking right in the driveway of 442 Elm Street. The house looked tired. The landscaping was overgrown. The paint on the trim was peeling. I walked up the concrete steps and rang the doorbell. Footsteps approached. The door swung open and there stood Victoria Vance. She looked a decade older than her 43 years. The dyed black hair was now brittle, unkempt, and deeply streaked with stark white roots. Her eyes were rimmed with red. Her face lined with the deep, permanent stress of poverty. She looked at me, taking in my expensive suit, my immaculate appearance, and the luxury vehicle parked in her driveway. A flicker of intimidation crossed her face, quickly replaced by a desperate, fawning smile. She didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. To her, I was just a ghost she had left at a boardwalk pier 10 years ago. "Hello," Victoria said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You must be from Lex Properties. Please, come in. My husband, Gideon, is waiting in the living room." "Thank you," I said, my voice gauges smooth and utterly devoid of emotion. I stepped into the foyer. The house smelled stale. The lavish furniture I remembered from my childhood was mostly gone. Only a few cheap, mismatched chairs remained in the living room. Gideon stood up as I entered. He was wearing a suit that was clearly 10 years out of date. He extended a hand, offering a nervous, sweaty smile. "Thank you so much for coming down in person, mister." I didn't take his hand. I simply let my gaze drag slowly from his outstretched fingers up to his desperate, hollow eyes. "You can put your hand away, Gideon," I said, my voice ringing with a chilling, absolute authority. Gideon blinked, visibly taken aback. He slowly lowered his arm. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" I walked slowly into the center of the room, turning my back to them for a moment as I surveyed the empty, depressing space. "I remember this room," I said softly, trailing a gloved finger over the dusty mantelpiece. "I remember being locked in here during a thunderstorm while the two of you took Julian to a hotel with a pool because the power went out. I remember asking for a flashlight and being told I was too loud." Victoria frowned, her artificial smile slipping completely. "Excuse me. What are you talking about?" I turned slowly to face them. I let the mask drop. "The property deed is owned by Lex Properties. Lex is a subsidiary of the Amber Trust, and I am the sole director." I watched their faces, waiting for the exact moment the realization hit. "My name is Caleb," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. "It's been 10 years since you left me at the boardwalk pier. I told you I wouldn't cry, and I didn't. But I promised myself you would." The silence that descended upon that dusty, decaying living room was absolute. Gideon stopped breathing. He stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, mapping the contours of my face. Beneath the expensive suit, the underlying bone structure of the 9-year-old boy they had driven out to the boardwalk was still there. Victoria's reaction was entirely different. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, hysterical denial. She let out a sharp, erratic laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Victoria snapped. Gideon tell this boy to get out. Caleb is gone. He's been gone for 10 years. He's probably rotting in some group home." "I didn't rot, Victoria," I said, my voice gliding over her hysteria like ice over a hot stove. "I thrived. The state placed me with a woman who actually understood the definition of a mother. While you were busy plunging yourselves into insurmountable debt to fund your pathetic illusion of high society, I was building an empire. Lex Properties. The smoothie franchises in the tri-state area. The tech holdings. It's all me." Gideon's knees finally buckled. He slumped heavily against the arm of a stained recliner. "Caleb," he choked out. "It really is you. You bought our house. I bought the bank's house, Gideon gang, I corrected him sharply. You lost it the moment you decided to embezzle funds. I just picked up the scraps. You have to help us, Victoria shrieked, suddenly lunging forward. We're your parents. Your blood. You have all this money. You can't just throw us out on the street. I am not your blood, I replied, taking a deliberate step back. You severed that tie on May 8th. You signed the relinquishment papers to avoid a prison sentence for child abandonment. Legally, biologically, emotionally, you are nothing to me but a bad investment I cut loose. Before Victoria could launch into another desperate plea, the heavy wooden front door swung open. Mom, Dad, the Wi-Fi is shut off again. An entitled whining voice echoed through the hallway. Heavy aggressive footsteps stomped into the living room. It was Julian. He was 16 now, dressed head to toe in limited edition hypebeast streetwear, holding a half-empty energy drink. His hair was perfectly styled, his expression carrying the practiced superiority of someone who had never once been told no. He stopped dead in his tracks, blinking at the scene before him. He looked at his father, who was practically hyperventilating on a chair, his mother, who was sobbing hysterically, and then at me, a towering figure of wealth and authority standing in the center of their ruin. Who is he? Julian demanded, his lip curling into a sneer. Is he from the bank? Tell him to turn the internet back on. I have to upload my game stream. I looked at Julian. The phantom ache in my left side, the ghost of the liver I had sacrificed in my past life to save this utterly worthless human being, flared up in my memory. In that life, I had literally died for him. In this life, he was just a spoiled ignorant child standing in the ashes of a burning house. I'm your landlord, I said smoothly, turning my gaze back to Gideon and Victoria. And I'm here to deliver my final decision regarding your request for a lease extension. Gideon looked up. A pathetic glimmer of hope pooling in his tear-filled eyes. Caleb, please, just a month. Give us a month to figure things out. I reached into my designer leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I let it flutter from my fingers, watching it drift down to land squarely on the dusty coffee table. Your request is denied, I stated, my tone devoid of a single ounce of pity. Furthermore, upon inspecting the property, I find you in violation of standard upkeep clauses. The original 30-day eviction notice is null and void. You are now being served with an emergency 24-hour notice to vacate for property destruction. If you and your belongings are not off these premises by noon tomorrow, the county sheriff will physically remove you. 24 hours. Victoria screamed. We have nowhere to go. Where are we supposed to sleep? I hear the benches at the boardwalk pier are quite accommodating this time of year, I whispered. I turned on my heel and walked out the front door. Behind me, the sound of Victoria's razor-sharp wailing and Julian's confused, demanding shouts echoed down the quiet suburban street. Desperation breeds severe stupidity. Instead of packing what little they had left and finding somewhere safe, Victoria decided to declare war. She contacted a bottom-feeding tabloid journalist. She sat on the curb outside the locked gates of 442 Elm Street, weeping into a tissue, claiming that an anonymous corporate landlord had illegally and brutally evicted her family. My public relations director Diana Croft called me the moment the segment aired. Shut it down, Diana. Release the truth to a reputable state paper. I want everything exposed. Everything? Diana asked. Everything, I confirmed coldly. The court documents from 10 years ago where they relinquished parental rights due to child abandonment charges, the police report from the boardwalk, and attach Gideon's recent criminal indictment for embezzlement. Let the public see exactly who they are. Within 12 hours, the narrative violently flipped. A major state newspaper picked up the story. The headline read, Local family evicted by real estate firm exposed as child abandoners and embezzlers. The backlash was instant and catastrophic for the Vances. The GoFundMe was frozen and refunded. The few people in Pinehurst who had offered them temporary couches rescinded their invitations in disgust. They became pariahs overnight. Julian, fueled by a decade of narcissistic entitlement, managed to track me down. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was having lunch with Elena at one of our flagship smoothie bar locations downtown. The bell above the door chimed and Julian stormed in. He looked haggard. He scanned the room, locked eyes with me, and marched over to our booth. "You!" Julian hissed, slamming his hands down on our table, rattling the cups. Elena immediately stood up, her maternal instincts flaring. "Excuse me, young man. You need to back away from this table right now. Stay out of this." Julian spat, glaring at Elena before turning his venomous eyes on me. "You ruined my life. My friends won't talk to me. I had to sleep in our rusted car last night because of you. You're my brother. You're supposed to be family. You have millions of dollars and you're letting me starve." I calmly wiped my mouth with a linen napkin and looked up at him. "We are not brothers, Julian," I said quietly. "A brother doesn't stand by while parents lock another child in the basement. A brother doesn't demand expensive luxuries while his family goes bankrupt." I was a kid. Julian cried, tears of pure rage spilling down his cheeks. "I didn't know what they did to you. You can't punish me for their mistakes." "I'm not punishing you for their mistakes," I replied softly, leaning forward. "I'm punishing you for who you are. You have spent your entire life feeding off the destruction of others. In another life you would have taken my literal organs to save yourself and then laughed while I died." Julian blinked, utterly confused. "What are you talking about? Organs? You're crazy." "Enough." Elena's voice cracked like a whip. She stepped directly in front of Julian, forcing the teenager to take a step back. "Listen to me very carefully, young man," Elena said, her eyes flashing with dangerous protective fire. "Caleb is my son. I raised him. I held him when he had nightmares about the people who left him at that boardwalk. You have no claim to him. You have no right to his money, his time, or his pity. Your parents made their bed and they dragged you into it. Now get out of my restaurant before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." Julian stared at Elena, his lip trembling. For the first time in his pampered, protected life, no one was swooping in to save him. He let out a pathetic, stifled sob, turned around, and bolted out the door. Elena sat back down, taking a deep, shuddering breath. She reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Are you okay, Caleb?" I looked at the door, watching Julian's retreating figure disappear into the crowded city street. "I am perfectly fine, Mom." I smiled, the word tasting right and true. "Let's finish our lunch." The final act of their pathetic drama played out a month later in the cold, sterile environment of the county courthouse. Gideon, fueled by the manic desperation of a cornered animal, had managed to find a sleazy, contingency-based lawyer named Donovan Reed. They filed a lawsuit against the Amber Trust, petitioning the court for retroactive parental compensation, and demanding half of the lottery winnings. I didn't even bother attending the initial hearing. I sent Nathaniel Cross. Judge Patricia Mercer, a notoriously strict adjudicator, presided over the case. Donovan Reed stood up and delivered an impassioned, entirely fabricated speech. Nathaniel simply stood up, adjusted his tie, and presented a single folder to the judge. "Your Honor," Nathaniel said smoothly, "I have here the official notarized court documents from 10 years ago signed by both Gideon and Victoria Vance. They voluntarily and completely relinquished all parental rights to Caleb to avoid state prosecution for felony child abandonment." Judge Patricia Mercer reviewed the documents, her face darkening like a thundercloud. She looked down at Gideon and Victoria, who were sitting at the plaintiff's table, sweating profusely. "Mr. Vance," Judge Mercer said, her voice dripping with judicial contempt, "You abandoned your child at a boardwalk, signed away your rights to avoid jail time, and now, a decade later, you have the absolute gall to walk into my courtroom and demand his money? This lawsuit is not only entirely devoid of legal merit, it is deeply offensive to the court. Case dismissed with prejudice." Furthermore, the plaintiffs are ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by the defense. It was the final nail in the coffin. A week later, I received the final report from Frank. I drove my Porsche to the outskirts of Pinehurst. Through a freezing winter freeze with heavy sheets of sleet, I drove slowly past a dilapidated, neon-lit 24-hour laundromat and bus depot. The cracked pavement outside cast a cold, flickering blue glow over the dark, empty street. A small group of transient people huddled close to the brick walls, trying to escape the biting sleet. I slowed the car. There, sitting on a rusted metal bench beneath the flickering neon sign, were Gideon and Victoria Vance. Gideon was wearing a stained fast food uniform beneath a threadbare canvas jacket. His shoulders were hunched, his face deeply lined with the absolute exhaustion of a man who had lost everything and was still not entirely sure how it had happened. Beside him, Victoria clutched a single plastic grocery bag of belongings, her hands raw and chapped from the cold. Her brittle black hair was matted against her forehead from the sleet. She was not screaming at anyone. She was not performing for an audience. There was no camera, no journalist, no neighbor to impress. There was only the cold bench. And the freezing sleet. And the quiet, devastating reality of exactly where their choices had led them. I sat there in the warm, leather-scented quiet of my car. I closed my eyes, summoning the memory of the hospital room one last time. I remembered the cold beep of the heart monitor. I remembered the searing pain of sepsis. I remembered the profound, crushing loneliness of dying while the people who were supposed to love me counted my money in the hallway. I opened my eyes. The phantom pain in my side was gone. The heavy, suffocating chain that had bound me to these people across 2 lifetimes finally shattered, dissolving into nothingness. The debt was paid in full. The ledger was wiped clean. They were exactly where they deserved to be. Not in a decaying motel room with a television. Not even that. Just the cold bench. Just the sleet. Just the consequence of every single choice they had ever made, compressed into one freezing night outside a rundown bus depot. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb. I didn't look back. 30 minutes later, I pulled through the wrought iron gates of our estate. The sleet had stopped and the evening sky was completely dark, casting a serene shadow over the manicured lawns. I walked into the house, greeted by the warm, inviting scent of fresh ginger, citrus, and sweet blueberries. Elena was in the kitchen, humming an old country tune, pulling a tray of freshly baked lemon blueberry scones out of the oven. They looked slightly lopsided, just the way they always did. "Hey, Corazon." Elena called out, her face lighting up the moment she saw me. Perfect timing. I finally figured out the temperature setting on this fancy new oven. Want to be the taste tester? I smiled, dropping my keys on the counter and walking over to her. I took a warm pastry, feeling the heat radiate through the paper liner. "I'd love nothing more, Mom," I said. "In my first life, I was given a family that destroyed me. In this life, I built a family that saved me." And as I took a bite of the pastry, surrounded by the warmth and security of the empire we had built together, I knew that the real victory wasn't destroying the Vances. The real victory was surviving them and living a life so beautifully, unapologetically happy that they couldn't even cast a shadow over it. The ultimate revenge isn't just watching your enemies fall. It's building a life so monumental that their absence becomes your greatest asset. Caleb didn't just reclaim his stolen future. He architected an empire alongside the woman who truly deserved the title of mother. Meanwhile, the Vances learned the agonizing truth. You cannot throw away a diamond and expect to keep shining. They traded their humanity for temporary luxury, and in the end, it cost them everything. If Caleb's epic journey of rebirth, calculated justice, and found family kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share the story with anyone who believes karma never misses an address. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more intense stories. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in Caleb's shoes. The end.